Greetings. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, known as Caligula, was born in the year 12 into the family of Germanicus, the grandson of Emperor Augustus. His father was adopted by Augustus, and Agrippina the Elder, the granddaughter of Augustus. He was the sixth son in the family. 3 sons died. The other children outlived their father. 3 daughters, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla, and 3 sons, Nero, Drusus, and Gaius Caesar. Gaius' father held very responsible administrative and military positions and was extremely popular both among the legionaries and the common people. After Germanicus's death, the people's love and popularity transferred to his sons. From the age of 2, Gaius was with his father in military camps, and, as they say, Agrippina often dressed him in legionary attire, which was warmly received by the soldiers, who nicknamed the future emperor Caligula, little boot, from the name of soldiers' sandals, Caligae. After Augustus's death, the stepson of Augustus, Tiberius, 1437 A.D., became emperor. Tiberius was jealous of Germanicus's popularity, and in the year 17, Caligula's father fell ill and died. Many blamed the emperor for the death of the popular general, alleging that he had ordered Germanicus to be poisoned. There is no direct evidence of this, but at least Germanicus's wife, Agrippina, without hesitation, accused the emperor of her husband's death. Tiberius exiled Agrippina together with her son Nero to the Pontian Islands in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Another brother of Caligula, Drusus, was placed in prison. In the end, all 3 perished. However, Tiberius kept the young Caligula with him on Capri, possibly wanting to secure a potential successor and intending to oversee his upbringing. After the death of Tiberius, in which some ancient authors accused Caligula and the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, Quintus Macro, Caligula was proclaimed emperor and took the oath of allegiance from the legions. The course of events was natural. The son of Germanicus, Caligula, was incredibly popular, and moreover, influential Macro exerted considerable efforts to elevate him to the throne. However, in gratitude, in the year 38, Caligula ordered Macro and his wife to be imprisoned, where they ended their lives by suicide. Regarding Caligula's proclamation, Suetonius wrote, "He attained power to fulfill the best hopes of the Roman people, or rather, of all mankind. He was the most desired ruler for most provinces and armies, where many remembered him even as a baby, and for the entire Roman crowd, who loved Germanicus and pitied his nearly destroyed family. The people met him along the way with dense, cheering crowds, with altars, with sacrifices, with lit torches, bidding him farewell with good wishes, calling him little light, darling, doll, and baby." The beginning of Caligula's reign was quite liberal. He emphasized his respect for the senators and his desire to cooperate with them. The infamous law on insulting majesty, which Tiberius used to combat political opponents, was repealed. Gospel scholars might recall that even Christ was condemned under this law, as a man proclaimed Messiah, that is, the future king of the Jews, and indeed the emperor was considered such. According to Roman custom, the guilt of the condemned was depicted in the inscription on the cross. If you remember, it was written, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, INRE." So, Caligula declared amnesty and rehabilitation for all cases of insulting majesty, and cases related to these accusations were publicly burned in the Forum. He repealed the order of speaking during voting in the Senate, introduced by Tiberius, first the emperor, then the senators, forced to reptilianly confirm the emperor's opinion. Caligula restored the traditional order. The emperor speaks last. The most odious taxes were abolished. In late September to October of the year 37, Caligula unexpectedly fell ill, and after that, according to general opinion, his behavior sharply changed. It's impossible to make an exact diagnosis based on the surviving data, although it's most likely that it was acute encephalitis, or a worsening of the epilepsy he had suffered from since childhood. In any case, the result of the illness was a serious disturbance of mental health. His first surprise for his supporters came immediately after his recovery. Suetonius writes, "When he fell ill, people crowded around the Palatine day and night. There were even those who gave written oaths to fight to the death for the patient's recovery or to give their life for him." Naturally, after the emperor's recovery, his exalted supporters were not in a hurry to fulfill their feverish vows. However, Caligula insisted on their fulfillment. From the person who promised to fight as a gladiator for his recovery, he demanded the fulfillment of the vow, watched the fight himself, and released him only after prolonged pleas, and that only as the victor. As for the one who pledged to give his life for him but hesitated, he handed him over to his slaves to chase him through the streets adorned with garlands and sacrificial bands, and then, in fulfillment of the vow, to throw him off a precipice, that is, from the rampart where they buried the offending Vestal virgins. The new habits of the emperor were soon felt by the senators. Suetonius writes, "Some of the senators, holding the highest offices, dressed in their togas, he forced to run behind his chariot for several miles, and at dinner stand by his couch at the head or at his feet, girded with a napkin-like slave attendants. He secretly executed others, but continued to invite them, as if they were alive, and only a few days later falsely announced that they had taken their own lives." When the livestock, used to feed wild animals for spectacles, became restless, he ordered criminals to be thrown to them for tearing apart, and, going around the prisons for this purpose, he did not care who was guilty of what, but directly ordered, standing in the doorway, to take everyone. Many citizens of the first ranks, Suetonius writes, he branded with hot iron and sent to mining or roadworks or threw to wild beasts, or placed them themselves, like beasts, on all fours in cages, or saw them in half, and not for grave offenses, but often just because they spoke ill of his spectacles, or did not swear by his genius. He forced fathers to be present at the execution of their sons. For one of them, he sent a litter when he tried to evade due to illness. Another, immediately after witnessing the execution spectacle, he invited to the table and compelled, with all sorts of kindness, to jest and make merry. He constantly repeated the famous words of a tragedy, "Let them hate as long as they fear." In the circus, he cheered for the greens, and when the mob insulted him by applauding other charioteers, he exclaimed, "Oh, if only the Roman people had but one neck," mourning that he could not cut it with one blow. Once he expressed a desire to abolish the legal profession so that no interpretation of the laws would contradict his will. In luxury, he surpassed the most extravagant spenders with his expenses. He invented unheard-of baths, exotic dishes, and banquets, bathing in fragrant oils, both hot and cold, drinking precious pearls dissolved in vinegar, and distributing bread and appetizers to his companions on pure gold. One must live either as a pauper or as a Caesar, he would say. At the auctions he held, offering for sale everything left after grand spectacles, he himself set the prices and inflated them to the point that some, compelled to make a purchase, lost all their wealth and opened their veins. He levied new and unprecedented taxes, first through tax collectors, and then, as it was more profitable, through Praetorian centurions and tribunes. Not a single thing, not a single person escaped taxation. For all food sold in the city, a fixed duty was collected. From every judicial case, a 40th part of the disputed sum was demanded in advance, and those who withdrew or settled without trial were punished. Porters paid an 1/8 part of their daily earnings. Prostitutes, the price of one sexual encounter. He organized a campaign to Britain in a rather peculiar manner. He assembled an army on the seacoast of Gaul, deployed ballistae and other machines, and ordered everyone to gather shells into helmets and folds of clothing. This, he said, was the spoils of the ocean, which he sent to Jupiter Capitolinus and Apollo Palatinus. In memory of the victory, he erected a tall tower to serve as a beacon like the Pharos lighthouse, guiding ships at night, and ordered a triumph to be organized. For his horse, Incitatus, swift-footed, he constructed a marble stable and ivory manger, provided purple coverings and pearl necklaces, and even allocated a palace with servants and utensils for him, where he would invite and willingly entertain guests on his behalf. Eventually, Caligula purportedly announced his desire to make Incitatus a consul. According to most researchers, the excessively luxurious lifestyle of Incitatus and the desire to make him a consul were intended to mock the greed of the senators. Moreover, Caligula, by his words, demonstrated the ability to appoint anyone as consul. Unlike other emperors, who were deified after death, Caligula declared himself a god while still alive. A temple to the new god was built, and a priesthood was formed, with Romans aspiring to the honor of becoming a priest of the newly proclaimed god, required to pay 10 million sesterces for the privilege. He ordered statues of the most famous gods from Greece to be brought, commanded their heads to be removed, and replaced with his own likeness. One of Caligula's most grandiose follies was his directive to erect his statue in the temple of Jehovah in Jerusalem, in the likeness of Caligula Jupiter. Had it been carried out, a mass uprising of the Jews would have been inevitable. The governor of Syria, Publius Petronius, realizing the negative consequences of such a decision, sought to delay and appealed to the emperor to revoke it. Enraged, Caligula sent a messenger with orders for Publius Petronius to take his own life. The legate of Syria was saved only because the messenger was delayed slightly, and the order for his suicide was received in Antioch after news of Caligula's death. Caligula's everyday behavior did not always befit a distinguished Roman. He was known for his extravagant manner of dressing, using exotic attire, jewelry, and footwear. He actively employed wigs for transformations and often dressed in women's clothing. The emperor frequently adorned himself as various gods, from Neptune to Venus, donning clothing corresponding to their images and selecting recognizable attributes. It is presumed that his inclination towards dressing up arose in early childhood when he entertained soldiers by dressing as a legionary. Suetonius writes, "He eagerly attended tortures and executions. At night He roamed the taverns and dens in a wig and a long dress, dancing and singing on stage with great pleasure. In doing so, he probably did not realize that his behavior was perceived quite differently by those around him than he assumed. Ancient authors accuse Caligula of incest with all three of his sisters, with his strongest attachment to Drusilla. According to Suetonius, he did not love and honor his other sisters so passionately. He often even handed them over for the pleasure of his favorites. He was married 4 times, and it was only with his last wife, Caesonia, that they had a daughter, Julia Drusilla. The emperor had several mistresses, and also engaged in sex with married noble Roman women, with the adultery not being concealed. Suetonius writes, "He usually invited women with their husbands to dinner, and as they passed by his couch, he examined them closely and deliberately, like a slave trader. And if any of them, out of modesty, cast down her eyes, he would lift up her face with his hand. Then, at his first desire, he would leave the dining room and summon to him the one who pleased him most, and returning, still with the marks of enjoyment on his face, he would loudly praise or scold her, enumerating in detail what good and bad qualities he found in her body, and how she performed in bed." Information about Caligula's appearance is highly contradictory. Suetonius left the following description. He was tall, with a pallid complexion, a stocky body, thin neck and legs, sunken eyes and temples, a broad and gloomy forehead, sparse hair on his head, with bald patches on the crown, but a hairy body. A more subjective description comes from Seneca, and contemporary of the emperor, a sickly pallor, betraying madness, a wild look from eyes deeply set beneath an elderly forehead, an irregularly shaped, ugly, bald head, with pitiful patches of hair here and there. Add to this a neck overgrown with thick bristles, thin little legs, and monstrously huge feet. However, if we look at the busts of Caligula, or his images on coins, the impression is entirely different. He appears quite normal. It remains to be decided who lied more, Suetonius, who disliked Caligula, Seneca, who hated him, or the sculptors who were consciously trying to please the emperor. Obviously, they all exaggerated to some extent, although some researchers suggest that Caligula's appearance may have been disfigured due to illness. I think my listener understands that emperors with such eccentricities on the throne don't linger, and generally don't fare well in this world. The same fate befell Caligula. On January 21st, 41 A.D., Caligula was killed by the Praetorian guards. The assassination was orchestrated by the Praetorian tribune Cassius Chaerea with several Praetorians. The emperor's wife, Caesonia, and their only 11-month-old daughter, Julia Drusilla, fell victim to the guards as well. The reign of the madman ended as it was destined to end. The people were indifferent. Over the years of Caligula's rule, he managed to squander all the popularity he had inherited from his great father. A huge number of historical studies and artistic works have been written about Caligula. Among the most famous authors, I would mention Alexandre Dumas the Elder, Albert Camus, and others. Filmmakers have also paid attention to our hero. The most famous erotic film directed by Tinto Brass was released in 1979. But besides that, Caligula has been the focus of 2 adaptations of Robert Graves's novel I, Claudius, made in 1937 and 1976. In the latter multi-part adaptation, the 8th episode is dedicated to Caligula, titled Zeus Almighty, and the 9th is titled Hail Who. In this part, among other things, the scene of Caligula's assassination and the unexpected proclamation of Claudius as emperor are shown. In addition to the mentioned works, Caligula is also featured in several other fictional and documentary films. Among them, I would note the 2nd and 3rd episodes of the series Anno Domini from 1985, which discusses the history of early Christian communities in the 30-70 SAD, and in connection with this, the filmmakers devoted considerable attention to the rule of Emperor Caligula. In particular, the attempt to establish a statue of Caligula in the Temple of Yahweh is shown. From a purely artistic point of view, I would also mention the adaptation of the theatrical production Caligula, based on the play by Albert Camus. So, the story of the Roman Emperor Caligula is concluded. Goodbye.